The case of lousy leadership. I preached on this series years ago in Pennsylvania. And back then it was one sermon. That was a long 45-minute sermon. It probably lasts a little longer. We're running a series on the book of Judges. And in the book of Judges, we're beginning in chapter 8, verse 33, that says, "No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They also failed to show kindness to the family of Jerubbaal," that is Gideon, "for all the good things he had done for them." Chapter 9, verse 1. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem and said to them and to all his mother's clan, "Ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons, Gideon's sons, rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I am your flesh and blood." When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless adventurers who became his followers. He went to his father's home in Orpah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers. And the sons of Jerubbaal, but Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, escaped by hiding. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered beside the great tree of the pillar of Shechem to crown Abimelech king. Wow. What a stinker. Gideon dies. Everything was going hunky-dory. And what happens? Are the people staying with the faith? Remember, Joshua says, "As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. We're not going to serve the gods of Egypt. We're not going to serve the gods of the neighbors. We're going to serve the Lord God Almighty. And the greatest commandment is this, to love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself." And so we had peace in the land, and Israel does evil. Back to the old, I talked about getting into the stew pot, and climbing out of the stew pot, and jumping right back into the stew pot. When we talk about judges, people think, here come to judge, here come to judge. But in the book of Judges, this is not the judges we deal about. These judges are more like Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok. That's the kind of judges. These guys will rise up to kind of clean out the evil in town. God raised up Deborah. She said, "Barrett, you got an assignment. You got to go with me." Then we had others like Tola and Jer and Ehud and Eglon and some of those adventures. And later on we'll have other heroes of the faith like Samson. But Gideon was the Wyatt Earp. And now we're going to have a future Wyatt Earp. But in this conflict, when we're talking about a conflict for control, this is nothing new. It happened in 1745. The man's name was Charles Edward Stuart, better known among the Scots as Bonnie Prince Charlie. He appeared in Glenfinnan in the Scottish Highlands. He was a tall, good-looking young man and an exciting, dynamic leader. The heir of the Scottish kings and queens, Stuart had returned to Scotland to recapture the throne because George II, the British king, was an arrogant crewman who spoke only German. And the Scots hated him. The Highlanders loved their Prince Bonnie Charles and committed themselves to follow him and dethrone the foreigner. At first they were successful in battle, but suddenly at the Battle of Culloden, their dreams came to an abrupt end, and the Scots were crushed by the English army. And although Charles escaped, his troops were totally massacred. The prince found his way to France to plan and to dream about another day that he'd return to take his ancestral throne. He never did. In fact, to meet Charles 20 years later was to confront a tragedy. He had become a hopeless alcoholic, his body and health broken. His life had become a record of disgrace and shame, a long trail of broken marriages, discarded mistresses, and public scandals. His former friends wanted nothing to do with him. The Scots may still sing about their bonny Prince Charlie, but there was very little that was bonny about Charles at the end of his life. The life of Charles Stuart is the story of a great beginning, Gideon, a man who accomplished great things, but he wanted to become priest, and so he added an ephod to his mix, and he decided to add wives to his mix, and he fathered 70 children to his wives and mistresses. Bonnie Prince Gideon. And we read about his successes and a few battles that he was great at, but toward the end of Gideon's life, it was a tragic end. And here we say Gideon is dead. Does this tragedy end there? No. It continues with more tragedy. The backsliding started in Gideon's own family. And Abimelech went to his mama's people and he said, hey, now we're talking about lousy leadership. And that takes us to the days of the Kennedy-Hoffa debate in the Senate. Jimmy Hoffa turned to Mr. Kennedy and he said, Mr. Kennedy, are you calling me a crook? And Bobby says, no, Mr. Hoffa, I am not calling you a crook. I just say you surround yourself with crooks. You surround yourself with thieves. You surround yourself with gangsters. No, you're not a crook, just your closest buddies are crooks. Later on, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. They don't know if he's a piece of concrete foundation in some Pennsylvania building or whether he's poured over with some highway and he's buried underneath some highway in Pennsylvania. We don't know till Judgment Day whatever happened to Jimmy Hoffa. We do know that they took out Bobby Kennedy next. But we had a man, Bobby Kennedy was a man of character. And he went after the bad guys. Gideon had 70 sons. Gideon had these sons, they were his offspring. He had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son. His name was Abimelech. So your wives are good, your offspring, your wives are good, but your concubine, your mistress, your girlfriend ends up becoming the Frankenstein monster that destroys Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein. He kills 69 brothers, 70 brothers save one, to become king. Judges 9:5, he went to his father's house of Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. Jotham escaped. Remember Mussolini?
Yep.
Remember him?
Yep.
Another case of lousy leadership. And our sermon is Jotham's bramble bush. In the case of lousy leadership, we're dealing with this man called Abimelech. Mussolini claimed himself a world conqueror. After a month to entrench himself in positions which should have been impregnable, the war machine of Great Britain rolled against Mussolini's invincibles. And Benito became finito. 150,000 Italian prisoners were taken. 20 generals were taken. The power of Italy was broken in Africa for generations to come. The guns, the munitions that Italy purchased were now in the hands of the Brits. Remember when old Muammar Gaddafi of Ethiopia, and these guys came in on Datsun trucks, and they had these machine guns mounted on the backs of Datsun trucks, and he came in and took over the Soviet emplacements of all the Soviet munitions and tanks and cars and planes and jets and bombers and fighters. Billions of dollars worth of equipment were taken by guys with Datsun trucks with machine guns mounted on the back trunk. And then we have the Gaddafi became, humbled. But let me do a little thought about our Italians. My grandpa was from Sicily, Italy. And so some will say, well, preacher, you're beating up on us Italians. But I think I'm half Italian and half German. a little bit of French Alsace-Lorraine. The Italians are not soldiers. They're geniuses in culture and artistry rather than military. We cannot condemn a man because he'd rather carve marble than carve up his neighbor. The Italians would rather sing than fight. And the Italian prizes the paintbrush and the palette above the bomb and the bayonet. Il Duce, Mussolini, built a training center and a school called the Mussolini Forum, which is pictured here. It had a gigantic natatorium and a stadium and dorms. And there the flower of Italy's youth were gathered and trained to be physical, cultural teachers, schooled in athletics, and schooled as army officers. There was no finer school. There was no more attractive and manly group of young men. But during the time devoted to military drill, the voice of a chorus of a famous opera. The bleachers were stacked with the rifles of the entire corps, as it was spending its time for military drills, sitting in the bleachers, singing operas, and the drill master was the leading musician and the conductor. And in 1929, Il Duce, Mussolini said, "The only weakness in my program is the fact that I have to build Italy and the empire using Italians." After the Battle of Bardia between the British and the Italians, the British won and eventually captured the Italian general. At headquarters, this Italian general said this: "I don't care who owns Libya. It's a filthy desert, not worth fighting for. You English are welcome to it. I am not a soldier. I am an artist. And that is all I care about. Fighting is stupid, brutal, and dirty. And I'm glad I'm out of it. Good artists, lousy soldiers." The leadership of a nation reflects the character of that nation. The leadership of the church reflects the character of the church. Lousy leadership produces lousy churches and lousy communities and lousy nations. Good leadership, on the other hand, produces good churches and good communities and good homes and good nations. But Abimelech failed in big ways. Judges 9, Abimelech the son of Jerubbaal went to Shechem, to his mother's brethren. We went through there. His sins of polygamy went on. Remember our friend Saddam Hussein? Some will look upon him as being a great leader. You know how he got in his position? He came into his national forum like our Congress, and he stood up and he brought his henchmen in. He says, "Who's on my side? Who's not on my side?" And he had his men machine gun down everybody that opposed him. That's how he rose to power. He rose to power the same way Abimelech rose to power. I'm going to take out my 70 brothers, and there's only going to be one of us left. And this is exactly what Saddam Hussein did. He took out all his opposition brutally to get into his position. Some will look at him as a great leader. He maintained order in that community. You took him out and everything ended up a vacuum. But then you look at the daily news. We bag the bum, they hang him through the court system. And he got his comeuppance. But is there any parallel between Saddam Hussein and Abimelech? Did Abimelech meet his end? We will see. The Bible goes on to tell us in Judges chapter 9, verse 7. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed to the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you." One day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, "Be our king." But the olive tree answered, "Should I give up my oil, by which both gods and men are honored, to hold sway over the trees?" Next the trees went to the fig tree and says to the fig tree, "Come and be our king." Verse 11, But the fig tree replied, should I give up my fruit, so good and so sweet, to hold sway over the trees? Then they came to the vine. Come, be our king. But the vine answered, should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and men, to hold sway over the trees? Finally, the tree said to the thorn bush, come, thorn bush, come and be our king. And the thorn bush said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Now if you have acted honorably, verse 16, and in good faith, when you made Abimelech king, if you have been fair to Jerubbaal and his family, if you have treated him as he deserves, and to think that my father fought for you, risked his life to rescue you from the hand of Midian, but today you have been revolted against my father's family, murdered his 70 sons on a single stone, and made Abimelech, the son of a slave girl, king over the citizens of Shechem, because he is your brother. If you have acted honorably and in good faith toward Jerubbaal, Gideon, and his family today, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But if you have not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume you citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from you citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and consume Abimelech. And then Jotham fled, escaping to Beer. And he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. I wonder why he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. But here Jotham is speaking on a mountaintop, hilltop, across the valley, preaching this parable. Says, you just appointed, you dishonored my father Gideon, who led you in all righteousness until his latter days. Now you destroy all his offspring, save me. And you appoint Abimelech, a lousy leader, not a vine, not a palm. You pick out a thorn bush. You can't get any lower than a sandspur. You're going to take a sandspur and put him a cocklebur, a beggar lice. He is your leader. And then he pronounced a curse upon the people of Shechem and upon these guys that were hirelings. Of course, we notice that Abimelech only rules for 3 years. There's lessons to learn. Good things can become bad. Gideon had his ephod where it belonged to the priest, and he took on priestly rights. Bad things can become evil. Abimelech turns around and kills his brothers. And if not stopped, bad's going to become worse. What worse can happen? But let's remember Daniel chapter 4:25. We have seen in our country good presidents and bad presidents. We've seen leaders come in. We figure we're going to hope these guys are going to be like Millard Fillmore. They're only going to rule for 4 years, and our crazy country elects them for 8 years. We've seen great men. We've seen poor men. But Daniel 4:25 tells us this, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Why did God allow them to have Abimelech rule over them? Because that's exactly what they deserved. That's what they wanted. Okay, guys, that's what you want. You want a thorn to be your ruler? That's exactly what you get. And I say that every time my guy doesn't win a particular election over the last 50 years I've been voting. Sometimes my man wins and sometimes my man doesn't win. And I said, okay, America, you got exactly what you deserve. You know, Morgan, I appreciate what you said about our school system. My wife and I are very, very involved as she was president of the Parent-Teacher Fellowship in Pennsylvania. That's when I shared I was going to run for school board. My eldest said, you run for school board, we're going to find your body in the trunk of a car. Because the mafia controlled the school system in Pennsylvania, as well as the Teamsters. They're among the coal miners. We're in coal mining country. So we started a Christian school, and I remember we had T-Berry, no, it wasn't T-Berry. It was one of the board directors. He was a black man. He was a Baptist preacher's son. And he tried to say that everybody that was a teacher in the Fayette County school system needed to go to church every Sunday. Now he tried to make that as a ruling that every teacher in Fayette County needed to be in church every Sunday. You know what the rest of the school board said to him? Ha, ha, ha. So he told us that if we continue doing what we're doing, very involved with our children in the school system, that we should be able to not see change now in our life, not to see change in Nathan and our children's life, but we'll be seeing change in Timothy and Caitlin and Emily and our grandkids' lives. We'll begin seeing changes then in Sarah's life, that when your grandchildren are here, then you start beginning seeing change if you stay doing what you're doing right now. I'm not a patient man. I'm going to sit around and wait 3 generations to begin seeing change. We immediately went out and saw change immediately. We started Christian school. We went K through 6 the first year. We went K through 9 the second year. We went K through 12 the third year. Did we know what we were doing? No. I became the chemistry professor. Did I have a master's degree in teaching chemistry? No. You know what qualified me to be? And I was not only teaching chemistry for our chemistry students, but for 3 other Christian schools. For 4 Christian schools, I was their chemistry teacher. You know what my qualifications were? I went to, we had Chem Bond chemistry when I was 13 years old, 13 years old. And maybe I was 14 years old at Boone High School. I passed with a B.
Is that like an erect or something?
And my chemistry teacher told me, "Did you cheat in that last chemistry test?" I says, "No, sir. Somebody apparently was cheating for me." Mr. Evans, my chemistry teacher. And I had a Gilbert chemistry set and I had a Porter chemistry set. And I had a chemist in the church. And so Saturday, my bench chemist from University of West Virginia, he and I went through all the experiments before we had the students do those experiments. And I'm going to tell you the story behind the story. You do not need a master's degree to teach and stay ahead of your class by 1 week. My kids in that chemistry class went to college. They became engineers. They became accountants. They became medical doctors and school teachers. Why? Because God gifted me that I can stay a week ahead of my class and teach the course. Even better than the teacher taught me the course. It's a gift. If I've never had the course, I can't teach it. We were going to make a difference, and we made a difference. And the Christian school movement began through there, and we even went all the way up through the state Congress with Congressman DeWeese appealing that they needed to change some of the rules and laws and all this of the Pennsylvania ruling over, and we fought it. It killed our school in fighting the state, the government, all the other stuff, but we made a difference for the state of Pennsylvania because they had legislation to protect Christian education for the whole state of Pennsylvania. But in the process of doing it, it cut our school in half. You win the war, but you lose a lot of battles and you have a lot of casualties in the way. But anytime somebody says, "Well, Richard, you know, it's our fault that you didn't make a difference." I was coming down into Point Marion and there's garbage all over the highway. And I pulled my car over the side, and here was the principal of Point Marion School, Mr. Bayless. Not only was principal, but he ran a tavern. And in Pennsylvania education, you're not supposed to have a conflict of interest where you are a principal of a school and you run a tavern. You don't do that. Pennsylvania, you do that. This is the land of the speakeasies. I pull my car over the side of the road, and I'm loading up these bags of garbage on this flatbed trailer full of pop cans and all. And I says, "I'm here to help. What can you say? I appreciate it. Who are you?" "I'm the pastor down there, the evangelist down at the Church of Christ, also the principal of Oak Grove Christian Academy." He says, "I'd like to meet you. I am the principal of so-and-so. And here we're picking up trash at the bottom of the hill, scattered all over the highway that got blown off his trailer as he's going down the dump." One of his teachers was a communist, and I pulled more students out of his class than any of his civics teacher was my best provider for students for my Christian school. We read on. Jotham fled, verse 22. Abimelech had governed Israel for 3 years. God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem. Okay, remember, Abimelech was the leader. He paid these guys to be his henchmen. But then God sent an evil spirit. Bad feelings came between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, who acted treacherously against Abimelech. God did this in order that the crime against Jerubbaal, whenever there's God's cursing gets fulfilled. And between the 70 sons and the shedding of their blood might be avenged on their brothers Abimelech and on the citizens of Shechem. Remember, there's no honor among thieves. The guys you surround yourself to do a crime later on are going to turn on you too, if they can get the upper hand. That's exactly what happened. And in verse 25, in opposition to him, these citizens of Shechem set men on the hilltops to ambush and rob everyone who passed by. And this was reported to Abimelech. So these guys became Robin Hoods. They're out in the fields and they're falling down upon anybody coming through with any kind of produce, whatever. Jael, son of Ebed, verse 26, moved with his brothers in Shechem, and the citizens put their confidence in him. And after they had gone out into the fields and gathered the grapes and trodden, they held a festival in the temple of their God. While they were eating and drinking, they cursed Abimelech. Then Jael, the son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech and who is Shechem, that we should be subject to him?" Now remember, he was the king for 3 years. And now we got dissent among the troops. But remember, he was a lousy leader to begin with. Isn't Jerubbaal's son, and isn't Zebul his deputy, serve the men of Hamor, Shechem's father? Why should we serve Abimelech? If only this people were under my command, then I would get rid of him. I would say to Abimelech, cut out your whole army, or call out your whole army. Then Zebul, the governor of the city, heard what Jael, the son of Ebed, said, and he was angry. Under cover, he sent messengers to Abimelech, saying, Jael, son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem. We're stirring up the city against, and now, then, during the night, you and your men should come in and lie in wait. And in the morning at sunrise, advance against the city. When Jael and his men came out against, do whatever your hand finds to do. They wait and wait. They lay in wait. The guys came out of the city, and they ambushed the guys in the city. Then they guarded the gate so the troops couldn't come back to the city, and they killed everybody and wiped out the city. And meanwhile, Abimelech's out here, and here's what happened in the outcome of the Judges. There was this lady, and it seems like women end up to become the heroines in all these Judges stories. Remember, it was Deborah, and who was the other? It was Jael with a tent peg that took out the enemy commander. And here we have a woman who takes a millstone and drops it off the wall, and it lands on Abimelech's head. Doesn't kill him instantly. But he tells his armor bearer, kill me with your sword, so it won't be said a woman killed me. I don't want to be humbled. But this is the crazy thing. He was a lousy leader, and anytime you have a lousy leader, God takes him out with a woman. What's the moral of this story?
Hide from women.
But it says in Judges chapter 9, verse 55, when the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. You know what we're going to do this morning? The sermon's over. We're going home. That's it. There are a few lessons. People who do not live right will bring trouble into their life. True love does not vaunt itself, is not puffed up, and pride goes before a fall. Vengeance belongs to the Lord, and he will requite wickedness of man. Those are the lessons we learned today. But oh, what lessons about lousy leadership that we can learn from the book of Judges.